Moving on to the panel discussion, I would like to invite the four speakers on stage, along with Mr. Andre Fernando, who will be moderating the session. Mr. Andre is the Managing Director at Mac Holdings.
So good morning, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening over. I think we now have the Q&A session first before we go into the panel discussion, is it? So if you have any questions, you would like to take it on, and you can also actually direct it at the person you want it directed. I am also willing to take any questions that is available. Yep, can we have a mic over there?
Hi, Sendil, thank you very much for that insightful presentation. Excellent. Just to put it in perspective, what advice would you be able to provide for the participants to help them to future-proof their businesses in the current context of supply chain disruptions, margin pressure, and also the logistic cost is increasing, and also very rightly you touch upon the new trend, the financial cost?
Yeah. Well, it's a very dynamic, complex, ever-changing environment. I think the number one rule for a service provider is to stay agile, right? The first and foremost thing is to stay agile. And particularly for us, because, we operate on very thin margins. So your agility that involves probably your intangible assets like your processes, your technology, leadership, strategy. All this comes together to stay very, very agile. This is the number one thing, because the changes are very constant, right? As we speak, the biggest trade lane historically has been the US, driven towards the United States or North American markets. But we don't know at this stage that whether this would change or not change. The geopolitics determines that, you probably might have a reset, maybe not now, maybe 5 years. So how do you adapt quickly to these changes? It's the biggest challenge right now. So number one rule is to, stay agile. The rest depends on your scale and what kind of an operator, whether you're a global operator, whether you're a niche operator. So this is key. Also, I think, to focus on the key markets, keep your eyes and ears close to that. I mean, right now, that's Transpac, as I said, is the biggest market. So, our experience has been to tackle that market. Having said that, the Indian subcontinent is growing. I mean, India is emerging as a key. We've been there, but the trend is slightly shifting. So these are some of the long-term strategies, but short-term is stay agile. I think that if you ask me for one single thing, I would say that, and it's very important, therefore, to introspect your processes, how you're doing it, how you, fulfill your commitments in terms of service and so on.
Before I come to the next question, actually, let me go through a few other things before we go into a Q&A session. So most of you would actually know everybody here. Those who don't know, we have on our right side Senthil. And Senthil is the CEO of Expo Lanka Freight Limited. As we all know, that's one of the largest freight entities in Sri Lanka, headquartered here at the moment. And done us proud by being a Sri Lankan entity and gone global, something that many of our companies don't do, with the exception of some apparel companies. On my right, next to Senthil, is Raghav, and he's a commodity trader and also doing a very interesting topic which is involving commodity hubbing in Sri Lanka. And he hubs various wheat and grains in Sri Lanka and then processes it and sends it to other parts of the world. On my left, very near me, I have my friend and namesake, surname, Felix, who is from Omega Line. They are a large Italian investor in Sri Lanka. And they are a manufacturer of lingerie. And he heads the Sri Lankan unit. And lastly, again, from the logistics and the freight background, we have Dileepa Dissanayake, who is the head or the CEO, MD of our API logistics entity in Sri Lanka. So I would, at this stage, quickly like to, pick a little bit of some of the things that was mentioned during the discussions. I think, Senthil, you very rightly mentioned that finance cost was one of the things that is going to be a big issue facing the industry. Now, being obviously majority owned by Japanese, if you are basically facing that kind of a concern when Japan is having one of the lowest interest rates in the world, I don't know what other companies in Sri Lanka are going to say. So with all that in place, what would you advise our Sri Lankan friends here to do in terms of finding funding?
Yeah, my point was, the Japanese are rich, no doubt about that. My point was that, when you look at the supply chain, right, the ultimate cost of supply chain, that's the key. I think we have a good opportunity here in the sense that ultimately, when you have an export or an import shipment happening, when your interest rates or the finance cost is very low, it probably doesn't impact the planning and the implementation of supply chain because, your inventory and the time doesn't seriously affect that supply chain movement. But when the cost is high, obviously there's a huge implication on the final cost of the product. So time is essence here. So that probably could influence, if somebody has planned something on a ocean freight inventory, 90 days or 120 days cycle of contract, they may think, okay, look, let me push this back. It has happened in the past. Let me push this forward and say, I don't need to incur this final cost on the merchandise because my inventory cost, my finance cost is so much. So instead of by sea, I could convert this into air, right? I'm just saying, just watch this space because this is a conversation with your customers. This is a conversation with your, the supply chain stakeholders. It doesn't happen. Now, if you take Raghav, he's not going to do that, right? Because his commodity is completely different. But when you have commodity that has a lifespan, that is, fast fashion and all these, there is an influence to this, electronics, right? So there is an impact. So this is something to watch for. If the interest or the finance behavior, cost behavior is short term, we don't need to worry about it, or we don't need, maybe that window of opportunity, if I call it, doesn't exist. But if the way it looks, we are going to drag along with this for the next 2-3 years. So this is something that's definitely going to impact the supply chain, and that can, I always say when one window closes, another window opens. So if some windows are closing, this is a window that's possibly opening, and we need to keep our ears and eyes close to that, and it's a conversation to have. When you look at the overall cost, and when you're discussing not a transaction, but when you're looking at an overall cost of the supply chain, yeah.
So what you mean here is actually choosing the correct mode of transport for the correct product.
Yeah, modes could change, that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
I mean, like, it could change,
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's an interesting point, of course, where I think Raghav also mentioned very rightly, if somebody is procuring electronics, it makes sense to procure that on air freight. Just in time, reduce your cost of warehousing, bring it straight into the store rather than trying to bring it on ocean, warehousing it for a long time, which will eventually increase your cost. Any other thoughts on this topic? What about anything from Dilip? Finance cost, general finance cost as well
I think,
as...
yes, I think the other element is the inflation, right? So of course, interest cost and inflation is going to impact the industry, and it's global. That's probably the point I wanted to add on top of Senthil, which he covered quite extensively.
And Felix, from an apparel import manufacturer standpoint, do you believe in holding stock, a large amount of stock, or do you believe in just in time?
Thank you, Andre. I think, gone are the days that, people or the manufacturers or the distributors want to hold stocks. They want to minimize because it's changing, It's sometimes, maybe as a manufacturer, I can tell you like that we get only a lead time 1 week. That is to receive materials, produce goods, and send, which is from the port to the factory to cut, sew, check, and send back to the port or the airport, just 7 days. So that earlier you used to get 50,000, 100,000, 300,000-400,000 stocks. But most of the brands now, they have gone to small order quantities because they do not know whether a particular style will be accepted by the market or not. And the advantage of this digital and also these ERP platforms, etc., makes it easier for the brands to follow how the sales are being done. Once they introduce a new SKU or new design, new style to the market, see because they'll be able to get end of the day. They can see how good they have done the sales from this particular stock item or the production garment, and maybe what are their stock levels. So based on that, they'll want to order the materials. So certain things, that's where the supply chain is very, very important. Like, for example, if we are buying the fabric from Europe, maybe, yes, we may have to keep some fabric here because the lead times are longer. But then we have multiple options. One is, maybe the warehousing. That maybe you get the grage, or what you say is the raw fabric, and keep it here. So that there are people in Sri Lanka also, certain factories, that they could dye this fabric. They can make any color. And there are some Sri Lankan fabric textile manufacturers, so they also bring the grade here, they keep. So this is happening with regard to the raw material, that's our imports. But when it comes to exports, more and more the buyer wants to get the smaller quantities. You wouldn't believe, like maybe when we started 22 years back, I started 23 years back, we had orders coming sometimes 500,000 pieces. Same SKU, but different sizing, maybe 3-4 sizes. But now some sizes, and also we ship to different destinations now. So, see, for example, when you ship to Brazil or when you ship to China, sometimes 200 pieces from one SKU. So this is not, in short, won't be applicable. Thank you.
How, on a completely different topic. How is the brain drain of the industry as a result of the current, few months of issues affecting maybe a commodity hub, commodity trader?
I think there is a big amount of brain drain happening, especially in Sri Lanka, where highly skilled people are exiting now because of their packages going down. There are very few companies whose salaries are pegged to the dollar. So people are obviously, anybody who is skilled or smart enough obviously wants to move overseas. And we've seen people going to all sorts of lengths to exit the country. And I think to sort of prevent that, we need to bring a lot more stability back into the country. And back to what you were saying about the finance cost, as soon as the country has more stability, the finance cost will also come down significantly. Because it's all a factor of risk. So making sure that all of us do our businesses smoothly, making sure that operations are running smoothly, will make sure that finance costs come down. We bring comfort and stability back to our teams. So means from an export perspective, where we like 90% or 95% of our income is derived from export income. We definitely see a lot of the skilled staff who were dealing with all our export customers wanting to shift overseas to a Dubai or a Singapore or even Australia, and where they're willing to leave an office job where they are well respected and even go and work in a supermarket just because it's out of Sri Lanka. So then in the long run, they are harming themselves as well because they're creating brain drain for themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but for Sri Lanka, definitely I see it being a big issue in the short run.
Absolutely. I think I've seen it happening, and I too believe that times are tough for the people, but times are tough for everybody. That includes the businessmen, others, etc. So we need to be in this together. And people just leaving the country and going overseas is not the only thing. But in turn, we also need to have a catch-22 kind of a situation. And what is your thoughts about it, Cynthia?
I think, we are also a very resilient country.
Yeah.
Some sort of normalcy, I think we'll see a lot of them coming back, So I'm hoping it goes in that direction. But is it a problem? Yes, we are using a lot of talent to the rest of the world. We need to ensure that our youth and opportunities stay attractive here for our future growth. But it is what it is, we are going through this challenge. But I think we are a country, if we have some level of stability, it's attractive enough for people to come back for various reasons. And I'm hoping that happens sooner than later.
And this is lined up also with the brain drain, and Felix, maybe yourself. The global economy also doesn't look in great shape. So, are the brain drain and people going overseas, is it going to be any sort of a blessing to them, or could they be walking from the frying pan into the fire?
It's a debatable question. Personally, I believe some amount of brain drain is okay, but what we have seen over especially from beginning of this year, I don't think that will help the country, because I've been telling this in various forums also, like we are asking a lot of investors to come and invest in Sri Lanka. What do we have here in Sri Lanka? What kind of natural resources we have in Sri Lanka? Okay, so do we have oil? Do we have, what are the raw materials, components? Okay, there are few basic materials like, wood stuff, tea, rubber, But then apart from that, we were basically selling our human asset. We were used to, very proudly, we used to market, we have a very developed, skilled workforce. So that's is going to, we are not able to sell, and we will not be able to attract any investments. But let me go little beyond from that, Andre, just basic brain drain. But why are they leaving? Are they leaving only for the money? Yes, some for the money, but also some are tired, fed up. So even, for example, even in you said the global recession. A global recession is there. Now, I'll talk from our industry's perspective. So we are also getting a lot of pressure. You see that, although the first 8 months, we have seen a phenomenal growth in our exports, roughly about 19%, 20% year-on-year growth. But we see for the next 6 to 10 months, quite dark, quite bad. But how, your industry, or the logistics industry in Sri Lanka, how good, how better they can serve us? Now we are talking about cost structures, increasing costs. Now recently we have seen also the DO charges and all those things coming up. So this is this fair? Is this the correct moment? Are we trying to make the wealth of few industrialists or few individuals, or maybe are we going to serve the industries, different industries? It's not only for the apparel. That's one. And then also, you all are always talking about location, port. Even yesterday, I listened to the inauguration speeches. People are talking about liberalization, but are we fully liberalized? Are we fully liberalized? No. Yeah, I see a lot of people in the audience nodding their heads, no. So, which means, what are the benefits we can get? See, sometimes, I just share one experience. Prior to COVID, when we send our shipments, the lead times, because I'm talking about the fast fashion, how important the finished garments need to reach the final stores, because we sell in about 55 different countries, but we send to only 3 distribution centers in the world. But the main is in Italy. Previously, it took only about less than a month from this send to reach there, but now that it takes almost about 55 days. So what are the issues? Are we getting enough ships coming to Sri Lanka? If not, why are they not coming? Okay. How is the clearing happening here? So I am sure that, if we allow even the multinationals to come here and, have 100% ownership or whatever, I think that will be very useful, because that will create competition. Now, earlier I think you all recall, like prior to 94, whatever, before President Chandrika Kumaratunga's time, we had only SLT, Sri Lanka Telecom. How difficult for us to get a phone line. But the moment that they opened that, now how improved, okay? What's the industry we have now? So that especially I believe in free market economy, that need to, people who are able to make money and also help others, help other industries, they will survive. The other people, according to the market economy, they'll have to drop away. So the people should not use they should grow naturally, not through influence. And that's one thing. And the last one I want to mention is that, especially in this industry, the decision makers, they need to look at the custom laws also, like maybe to make it faster when it comes to clearing, or whether it's forwarding or whatever, that they need to look at to have these things computerized. But I know the resistance coming from various sectors within, who are prone to various malpractices. But, it's the elected governments and the bureaucrats' job to make sure they look at the industries, the trade, that they want to sustain and improve for the country, not vice versa. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you made a valid point. I think liberalization is not in practice in the right sense here, even though mentioned. I do agree that majority ownership needs to be given to some of the bigger companies. But I don't know whether it should be at 100% level, but at least in the majority level, if it can be given, there'll be a decent amount of investments coming there. And what's your views on that, Senthil?
Rather, Andre, I would rather look at it than looking at, the percentages. I think it's important to put this into perspective. Let's take a good example of liberalization and the benefit the country can accrue. I want to take one industry that was so close to our heart, so close to our country, which is the tea industry. And let's take that industry and let's assess where we want to be in the value chain. Do we want to be upstream or do we want to be downstream? What we should have done, post-independence, it's easy to say, but, what should have happened is we should have moved upstream and control the London Stock Exchange, like Lipton's, like, all those people who are taking advantage of our produce. So today, from being one of the best producers of tea, we have got competition all over the world. Like, our tea is completely marginalized. We have tea in Kenya, in South Africa, in, all these places. And all this tea in these countries have been produced by Sri Lankans. The expertise went from here. So this is not apple-to-apple comparison, but when you look at the value chain, we hold the top, you hold the upstream, and we need to gravitate toward that upstream, right? We don't have, as a country, production influence, capacity influence that really determined by us, So we are in, okay, the geography is important, but it's only up to some point. So we need to really thrive full throttle to take advantage of what's happening outside us and be competitive, be open, invite, and then, we really need to look at that upstream. Where does that upstream? I mean, if you're taking capacity and, logistics, maritime, I think we need to target that upstream and make sure, one way or the other, that we stay close to that. And I believe that cannot happen without liberalization. That's the, as a country, if you want to benefit.
And I think it will also add a lot of value to the digitalization process that Felix was talking about. If we also bring in that expertise, foreign investments, I would say. Dileepa, from your perspective, what do you think about Felix? Made a few comments about online. To digitalize our processes, etc. And where do you think we are, and are we far away from achieving what we want to achieve? The last 2 years we had COVID. I saw a certain amount of improvised digitalization having in. Earlier we had to go to a shipping line to get our delivery orders, but today at least there are e-delivery orders being done. It's online process. We don't have to send PMs, so things are pretty decent. But that is just one part of it, but there are a lot of other areas to be improvised on?
Yeah, in terms of technology, my take is that we are not very far away. Of course, there are constraints as a country who we are. We can't put the same perspective as how it works in the United States. But as a lot of us discussed in the value chain, where is Sri Lanka? And in terms of bringing in technology, how much value do we add? I think we are fairly in line with the market expectations. Starting from the warehousing to starting from GPS tracking to the trucks, use of even blockchain into smart contracting, and facilitating the global value chains and the systems, and to have the workforce to support that. We are fairly in a decent position. But I'll also touch the brain drain you mentioned, how it is impacting this entire scenario, how we go up in the value chain. There are three aspects, right? There are a set of people who are leaving the country either unskilled or semi-skilled, and there are a set of people who are skilled, highly skilled, and who are stuck in the middle. They are contemplating whether to go or not because they don't see a future in the country. And there's a set of people like me who should be retiring and give way for succession, who should, the digital savvy, the millennials, Gen Zs taking over the industry, who understands, who speaks the language. I think that is going to be a long-term impact to the country. And this has to be addressed. The unskilled, we can train fast. We bragged to the world that we are at a very high literacy rate. But when we start losing high-skilled labor, especially in an industry like logistics, where you handle very complicated value streams, technology, it's not easy to replace people. So we need to nurture them. We need to have a system. And I hope, as most of you discussed, the stability of the country, the policy framework, if that stabilizes, the skilled people will start seeing a future. Especially the skilled people, go out of the country because they're uncertain of the future of their children. So that's what I think need to establish as a country.
I just want to add on a little bit there. And I feel that we've slowed down in the implementation of technology in 2022, which we saw the speed very, very fast in 2020 as soon as COVID hit. And everybody was implementing all sorts of new systems. But, and even 2021, early 2021, when we were not sure how long COVID would go on. And I think early 2021, the banks had started talking to us about implementing blockchain to transfer shipping documents, and which would be great, in terms of digitalization and ease of doing business, and that has somehow slowed down. I know all the shipping lines went ahead and put on everything online in terms of ease for customer, but those shipping documents that are still really, really slow in terms of with the entire breakdown now to get a shipping document out of Sri Lanka or into Sri Lanka, it's not the 1 day or the 2 day service, even from India. It takes us now 4 days to get a shipping document from India to here. And the vessel from, like, example, Tuticorin reaches in 6 or 8 hours. Yeah, and the documents from Tuticorin cannot reach in 5 or 6 days even because there's no direct connectivity. So it has to go from there to Chennai to Colombo, and sometimes they won't even put it on the direct flight because DHL or FedEx doesn't have that service. So I feel that technology, if it starts blockchain, if the banks can get back on it or the shipping lines can move those documents along, it would really help. So
I think the single window channel is the more important thing, Raghavan. I think we are nearing our time, so I know there Q&A session is still, there's a few questions to be asked. The gentleman in front, you've been eagerly waiting for your question to be asked, so go ahead to raise it.
Yes. Before the question, there was an interesting discussion on the brain drain. I think it's a combination of factors because it's a third world country, so you'll Can
you please introduce yourself?
Sorry, I'm Prasanta Disanayake. I'm from Milaha, Dubai.
Hi,
Yes, hi.
You changed.
So what I see from overseas is, of course, brain drain cannot be stopped for economic reasons and other reasons, but you also see, taking the company cultures. I mean, you have to give a clear KPI for the employees. Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? And how do you stop the brain drain? I mean, what are the opportunities to grow? So those are the things that needs to be coming a clear process. I think we have only a few companies in Sri Lanka, big conglomerates who who are doing that currently, maybe EFL, maybe Haley's or John Keel's or some companies. So I think overall there should be a clear process, a development process for the people. Where do you see yourself in the next 5-10 years? What are the skills you need to develop? Those kind of things. So it's a combination of factors. And also I see Sri Lankans traditionally here, like the politicians, they want to, do less work and expect more. But when they go overseas, they work 24/7. So it's a combination of factors that come into that. And then I want to ask a question from Felix. With China losing its impetus on this export with the zero COVID policy, and the apparel industry shifting towards Cambodia, Bangladesh, Vietnam, India, and other countries, how do you see Sri Lanka gaining momentum and ideas on it? Is the government supporting? Is the government a facilitator or a bottleneck? Or how do you see our labor costs comparing to these Southeast Asian countries?
I'll answer from the last question you asked. Labor costs, no. We are still very competitive, especially after the rupee depreciation. So that's not a fact. But the main reason is that Vietnam, of course, there are obvious reasons why people would like to go to Vietnam. That's what we have been advocating the various governments for the last 10, 12 years or so. Please, we need free trade agreements, because it's not the same level playing field when it comes to imports into different countries. So there are LDCs, lower developed countries. Most of the developed countries, they have opened their doors to import from LDCs without paying any import duties. Then also there are some other trade schemes, some other like ASEAN, some other European Union. So those kind of things are there. But apart from that, there are bilateral agreements. For Sri Lanka, I think we have half-baked bilateral agreement with India. We were trying to make one with China, but there were a lot of obstacles, I think, from our bureaucrats as well. But in case of Vietnam, they had made more than 13 or 14 FTAs with various countries. Mind you that, Vietnam and US, they fought in 50s. Yeah? Okay, so see now, they are very good trade partners, communist country. But why we are a democratic socialist and we consider as a friend of West and all sort of things, we are not able to get. So our foreign policies need to be revisited. And right now, we need to get into some FTAs with urgently with China and also UK. Now the UK is out of GSP Plus, UK, and maybe certain other countries like Japan, India, Australia. So that was the main reason. That's Vietnam's case was that. But then the other thing is, Bangladesh, they had enough labor and their costs were very low. Plus, they had, they also had access to fabric bases, plus they were LDC. They are going as LDC. So all these things help them to attract more investments. Plus in Sri Lanka, in our case also, we have seen many reasons that, we didn't have for an investor to come and invest in Sri Lanka, they didn't have trust. They didn't have a conducive environment here in Sri Lanka. That's one of the main reasons, because people come and keep on changing. I think yesterday in inauguration, I think probably it's Minister Ali Sabri mentioned this one. We have seen this one, not only from government to government, but minister to minister, chairman to chairman, DG to DG. The government official change, the policies are changing. India, now they have long-term policies, maybe for 10 or 15 years, whatever the government it comes, they'll keep on continuing that. Continuity is there. Here, we don't have the continuity. So with all these things, tell me, if you are a foreign investor, would you like to come and invest in Sri Lanka? No financial, maybe some reduced taxation, but they don't give any more the what you call tax-free facility also, unless otherwise you are a mega investor. But we don't need, people are not asking for the tax incentives. You need to have a conducive environment to produce and make money.
Thank you. One more question from Senthil.
That will be the last question.
Yes, yeah, okay. Senthil, how do you see the airline industry growing in Sri Lanka? Do we have the right infrastructure? Do you get the right governmental support? And how do you see us progressing?
Thanks, brother. Good to see you. But, you know, we were early adapters of, imagine, we were early adapters of free sky policies and all that. You know, when our region, India, Bangladesh, all of them had control skies. We had an open sky policy. We were the first to liberate. But unfortunately, though, you know, the environment is not conducive for us. I have already, you know, I've thought about this many times. How do you create this hub when you're not close to the largest, or you don't have a conduit to the largest trade volumes? I mean, yes, let's say Transpac is far away, but, you know, ISC is a very accessible, you know, trade base. So I think the opportunity is there, but a lot more work needs to be done. We are not able to support at least 30% of that volume for, you know, consistent operation by ourselves. So the attraction for someone to come, you need to have, you know, some value proposition that is, you know, encouraging. So it's a collective effort. We need some or other, like Felix said, to push the industry and some sort of reasonable, you know, volumes and, you know, to make it happen, you know. And you need to be able to tap into that largest volume of trade that's moving around, either Transpac or the ISC accessibility has to be there, you know. So, you know, that's where the challenge is. So do I see anything happening immediately? I don't think so. If even in the peak of demand, we didn't see any leverage happening here. So it's wait to be seen. I think, unfortunately, I don't see a huge, in the current environment, I don't see a huge hub opportunity for the aviation industry at the moment.
So thank you everybody. Mel, at this moment, I would like to thank CIMC Events, the organizer, Rohan Masakorala, my panelists, and everybody out there for listening to us. I think Rohan has a few things to be said. In view of time, we are willing to take a few minutes outside and take any questions should you have it on across outside. Thank you.
Yeah.